All right, welcome back. We are going to move on to our next mini lecture. It's going to be lecture 5C. This is where we're actually going to turn pages in our books to go to the glyoxylate cycle. The reason I want to teach this to you now, technically it's anabolism, but it fits right into the citric acid cycle. So I want you to know these reactions now because of the way it fits in. This is the time when you're really getting this all in your head. And that's when it's time to get the glyoxylate cycle in your head. Now, the important thing about glyoxylate cycle, they put it in the other chapter because it's primarily done in seeds. You don't usually do it, but it's really important because, seeds and plants are important to us. And there's a big chemical question that it answers. How does a plant grow from a seed? Seed growing into a plant is the ultimate anabolism, right? But it's not able to photosynthesize yet. So how does it get enough energy to be able to put molecules together until it can put its leaves up and actually capture sunlight? It needs a more efficient form of energy storage than glucose to do that. Glucose just won't cut it. But fats will cut it. Remember, they are more energetically dense than glucose is. And if you look on the labels, nuts and seeds will have lots of fats in them. So they solve a biochemical problem. And the way that they solve it is by using a modified form of the citric acid cycle. So fats are chopped up into 2-carbon acetate groups for metabolism. We're going to talk about that in the next chapter, in fact. Now, once you chop it up into 2-carbon bits, once you have the acetate, it's very energetically difficult to put these back up, especially because, if you think about it, it's hard enough to make pyruvate. It's even harder to make phosphoenol pyruvate because that's got a phosphate on it that makes it activated chemically. So basically, if you don't have to do it, if you don't have to make fats this way, you don't. And that's one of the main rules for this. Us vertebrates cannot make pyruvate from acetate on a net charge. We cannot make it in the sense of making enough to store it to make a net gain of the molecule. So we cannot convert fats to carbs. A really important point, technically you can connect the atoms and you can say, oh, I can make a molecule of fat from it. But actually it'll end up that you're always burning more than you're making, and so you'll never have a true net gain if you just follow the regular pathways, okay? But the important thing is the plants can actually do this, and they do it by modifying their citric acid cycle with 2 steps that sort of take a shortcut through the middle, because they change what they need from the cycle. This is a great example of how flexible the cycle is. Instead of using it for burning, they use it for building. And they use it for building fats, because when you're a seed, you need to build the fats from the sugars that the plant runs on, and you need to be able to make the fats for the time when you're a seed buried in the ground, okay? So you might be able to look at the arrows and you say, I can do arrows because I can basically turn oxaloacetate into PEP carboxykinase. Didn't you just say that we could do that? Anaplerotic reactions, right? But remember that the acetate has been used up by that point. That technically the atoms are there, but they've gone through the citric acid cycle. To be able to do that, you've taken 2 atoms of acetate and you've run them through the citric acid cycle, and they've come off as 2 atoms of CO2 already. So you have no net gain of fat. That's the really important part. Technically, you can rearrange, but you can't have a net gain of fat. And if you're storing energy, you need a net gain. This is why you can technically do it, but you can't do it for the reason plants do it. So this is what the glyoxylate cycle looks like. And it looks like a whole new thing to remember, right? But actually, look a little closer and see that it's got steps 8, 1, and 2 are the top half of it. It's only got, so basically from oxaloacetate to isocitrate, it's all the same. And what we have is we have actually to malate. I should go all the way to malate, because what you have is you have a little shortcut from isocitrate to malate. You're sort of cutting across the middle of the cycle. And you are going to be taking your isocitrate and you're going to be doing a lyase. Basically, you're going to be taking the 6 carbons and you're going to be splitting them apart into 4-carbon succinate and 2-carbon glyoxylate. Then you'll take the 2-carbon bit and you'll be combining that with another acetate group to make the 4-carbon malate. So those 2 steps at the bottom that are the only thing new here. And you're cutting across the middle. You're not decarboxylating it. You are actually turning the isocitrate into more succinate. So realize that succinate is being built up by this process. Acetyl-CoA is coming in, 2 of them for each turn of the cycle, and succinate is going out. And all that you have to do is make 2 new enzymes and have 1 new intermediate. The intermediate is now glyoxylate, which is that cool little molecule, 2 carbons, one of which is an acid, the other of which is an aldehyde. So it's got an acid on one side, aldehyde on the other, and that's it. So this allows you to make new succinate. It allows you to make new train cars, in a sense. And the succinate can much more easily be pieced together. It is a product. It can be pieced together to form fats by the seeds. And so ultimately, when you step back from this, you see that you have a reaction, you have a catalyst in this cycle, where you put in 2 2-carbon units, you get out 1 4-carbon unit. So it really is an anabolic building cycle. That's what the net gain is. So remember, succinate here is a product, not an intermediate. It's coming off of the cycle. It's like this little hamster that jumped off the hamster wheel. The usual citric acid cycle, like the molecules are like little hamsters that are just turning the wheel, right? But this one jumps off the wheel, and the succinate, he can go somewhere else and be turned into a fat molecule. So it can be converted in the normal way to oxaloacetate, but you have a net gain of it. And now you have excess oxaloacetate, and you can react that back to PEP, and you have a net gain of PEP. Then you have a net gain of glucose through gluconeogenesis. This is kind of a fine distinction, but it's this is what you get from biochemical reasoning. The fact that succinate is a product makes all the difference here. So seeds have glyoxysomes. They're organelles for running the glyoxylate cycle. I already explained why in my introduction. And you'll see that they will have lipid bodies where they store the closet, where they store all the lipids. They have the glyoxysomes where they make the lipids, where they turn sugar into more lipid. And as they're growing as a seed, this is how they store up the energy. And then when they're ready to grow, the lipids go from the lipid body to the mitochondria, and they get burned. Glyoxysome is for building, mitochondria is for burning. And this lets seeds convert the fat to glucose for energy before photosynthesis can happen. Because they need glucose when they're growing as well. So this is what almonds look like. This is a zoom in on almonds, and if you zoom in on almonds, they have a lot of fats, and the fats associate into little fatty globules, just like, gravy has fat globules in it, but almonds are like gravy because they have a lot of fat in them, and the fat's going to self-associate. It's what it does, right? And what's really funny about this, that means almonds are high energy. It's why you have nuts in your trail mix, right? Because you want to get energy from it. And fats are the most efficient way to carry energy. Well, they carry so much energy that they can actually spontaneously combust. So don't let TSA know about this, but there actually is a case that if you have uncontrolled combustion, say that the nut is rotting, it's producing CO2, the stuff's growing in it, right? It's being broken down from the fat to CO2. And it generates heat as well, because you're bringing it to a more stable, the CO2 is a more stable arrangement of atoms. In fact, pistachios have so much oil, and they are prone to this fat decomposition, that technically there are some International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code actually regards them as dangerous because they can catch on fire. If you remember, if you did calorimetry in general chemistry, like a soda can, and you put a nut underneath it, right? You burned that, you captured the heat, and you saw how much heat came out of the nut. That told you how many calories were in it for metabolism. It's the same kind of thing. Basically, nuts are combustible, and it's actually important because we need all kinds of nutrients. We need fats in our diet. So if you're a plant-based diet, you don't have to forego fats at all. You just are getting less of them, but you need to have some, like, peanuts, walnuts, some kind of fatty intake. And in fact, yes, probably part of the reason why these are on the maritime codes is if you have a lot of fats in one place, they can, just one little spark, can turn them into a big conflagration. And so this is a literal event, the Great Norwegian Cheese Fire of 2013. There was 27 tons of caramelized brown goat cheese. So this is a form of fat that was in milk, but it's all fat that we're talking about here. And this just shows you fats hold a lot of energy. It was burning uncontrollably in a road tunnel, so it was in a truck or something. And the fire spewed noxious fumes. It was like as bad as a tire fire because they couldn't put it out. It was so energetic that it was actually closed the tunnel down for 5 days, and it smelled just like petrol. It smelled just like gasoline burning, because gasoline is not very chemically different from fats. You run on the same type of molecule, the same type of chemical bond, CH bonds, that your car runs on. So just realize that you have this relationship between the 3 different bodies in a seed. You have the lipid body, which holds the fatty acids. The fatty acids go into the glyoxylate cycle, and so you can build up fatty acids through the glyoxylate cycle, but you can also use the succinate for other purposes. When the seed is germinating and it needs sucrose to be able to grow, it actually turns the fat into sucrose by taking the fatty acids, running them through glyoxylate, making succinate, and moving that to the mitochondria, and then turning that into a net gain of hexoses, which makes sucrose. The right side of this figure, where we're talking about gluconeogenesis, that is obviously a topic for another day. But just know that you can do it. You can make sugar from citric acid cycle intermediates. You can make almost anything from those intermediates. But the seeds do the special thing because they deliberately turn fat into succinate for the succinate to become sucrose. And that's how they get not just fats, but that's how they get the sucrose that they need to get kick-started. Each cycle has its own room. That's one of the ways that they're regulated. And making succinate will then replenish the cycle. And so that's why I think it's important to talk about it when we're talking about replenishing the cycle. There's another point of regulation for this. So how do you turn on one cycle and turn off the other? How does the seed do this? So when there's a lot of acetyl-CoA, it becomes a lot of isocitrate. And it turns out that isocitrate is the thing that will turn on one cycle and turn off the other. Look at this. Isocitrate will become succinate in the glyoxylate cycle. So it will actually, isocitrate will actually be turned down. You'll turn off the glyoxylate cycle if you have a lot of citric acid cycle intermediates around, if you have a lot of glycolysis going on. Basically, when you are using the citric acid cycle for burning stuff, you turn off isocitrate lyase, which is the glyoxylate cycle promoting enzyme. That will make succinate. Realize that you have an alternate, where you have the red X's on the left, you have green arrows, green triangles on the right. Because the opposite situation, you want the intermediates of citric acid cycle to turn up the citric acid cycle, and they actually turn up isocitrate dehydrogenase, which will make alpha-ketoglutarate, and that will turn the cycle more. The important thing here is that isocitrate itself, you have the first step of the glyoxylate cycle, in a sense, is the isocitrate lyase. So that's where you want to turn the glyoxylate cycle on and off. If you need ATP, you need to send the isocitrate over into the right. If you need to make glucose, and if you're a seed, you're going to want to send it to the left. And the way you do that is by having the isocitrate lyase be upregulated or not downregulated by the fact of these citric acid cycle enzymes. Basically, this is the most complex that it gets right now, but this idea of an isocitrate as a branch point, and if you want to burn more stuff, you make more isocitrate, is actually one of the regulation points that's important even for cancer and things like that. So I'm introducing it with seeds, but it's actually important for all of life. Just realize that this is the main thing. If you have energy, if you need to burn energy, or if you're building up citric acid cycle intermediates, you want to do more burning. So you have the burning side is turned on. If you have a lot of those, if you don't have a lot of those intermediates, you actually want to use it for building succinate so that then you can make more. This is only true for seeds. And that is Lecture 5C.